Well, this is a Sonora number 11 chime clock I just got off of eBay. It's a Seth Thomas, and it's in pretty good shape. The finish on the case is crackled and whatnot, but basically it's fairly intact. There's a little bit of damage to the veneering there, but that is nothing too critical. The only problem I had with it was that the clock through shipping didn't arrive in 100% intact. And I'll show you that in a second. Now what happened during shipping is, I guess the old wood and whatnot, through bashing around, all the mechanisms came loose, and the screws, they're floating around in the bottom of the case here. The screws pulled out of the sides, and one of the chime rods has broken off. Now, it's shipping clocks is a real crapshoot anyhow, so I don't see there's anything unrepairable on this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to look at the mechanisms and try and get some idea of what it's going to take to bring this back into shape. Okay, I disassembled this clock, and although it was kind of bashed in shipping, there wasn't too much damage. The only real thing I have to replace is the one chime rod. Now this clock strikes on a Westminster type sound, and so there's 4 chime rods. So I'm either going to replace the one, or maybe I'll replace all 4 chime rods with a tune set. I'm undecided on that. Good news, though, is the 89 mechanism seems to run fine. It looks like somebody at some point did a little bushing work on it, and it appears they did a good job on it. And I tend to think what happened is somebody had soldered brass plates to correct bushing wear, because there's evidence of solder, and I think somebody that knew what they were doing removed those questionable repairs and replaced it with some proper bushing work, because you can see where they've tried to remove the old solder a bit. They didn't go nuts on it, so it's pretty good, and the little solder residue isn't going to hurt anything. But the mechanism, I looked at all the bushings, and they all appear nice and tight. The clock, I leveled it up here, and I hung the pendulum bob on it, and it started right off. Now these 89 mechanisms for the Sonora type clocks are different. There's no internal trip to start the hour strike on these things, and what they use is, in conjunction with the chiming mechanism. The chiming mechanism trips this lever here, which causes the clock to strike the hour. Now, each time it does it, that was striking 1 o'clock, there's 2 o'clock, there's 3 o'clock, and so on. And that's the one big difference in these Sonora mechanisms, or the 89 mechanism used in the Sonora clocks. The other two levers, this one trips off the Sonora mechanism when it's time. It moves up and trips that off. This one here, at the appropriate time, strikes the hour and the quarter hour and whatnot. You can see that working now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this mechanism a little carefully. I'm going to at least clean it and re-oil it, and I have a feeling that's all it's going to need. Now the chiming mechanism here, this is a number 119 mechanism, as opposed to the you get a side view here, as opposed to the 90 mechanism used in the Bell Sonoras. But the only thing I can see wrong with this one is I'll use my broken chime rod here as a pointer. One of the little wires that lifts the hands up like that. And what that wire does is, if you want to turn the strike off, so it doesn't drive you nuts. Although I quite enjoy the music of these clocks. The rod comes down, just lifts the hammers off the thing so they don't hit the chime rods, so they silence it. So one of the little wires right here is broken off, and that's no big deal. That'll be easily fixed. The leather tips on these hammers are they're just worn out, so I'm either going to replace those with leather, or I'm going to make nylon type inserts to push in there, and it might give it a little sharper tone. So I'm going to try that and see how I like it, and if not, I'll go with the leather. The rest of the mechanism here again looks very clean. The one thing I noticed, the count wheel here is it's loose, but if you look, there's a little hole there that looks like a little pin went through, and I think that was retained onto that arbor by that pin. So I don't think there's any real damage here. I just think it's the pin fell off, because it doesn't do anything but rotate on that shaft. So what I'll do is I'll make sure I get it all timed up back. I'll put the little pin in there, and I think that's going to be the main repair on this unit. I've tripped it off. I wound it up and I tripped it off, and it seems to cycle pretty good. So again, I think if I just clean it up, it'll be good to go. The big heavy spring and the gear and all the teeth, where sometimes you get a lot of wear, that all looks good on this. So that's about half the battle there, because that spring is a monster, and it's you really got to be careful if you're going to fool around with that thing. But it doesn't look like I'll have to do too much to it. There's some residue on it, but again, I think a nice cleaning will serve that clock pretty good. Okay, I've been working on this 89 mechanism from my Seth Thomas Sonora 4-rod chime clock, and what I've done at this point, I've cleaned it very well, and I've got it oiled, and it's back running again. Now, a couple things I found with this mechanism here: the speed adjustment here, the little gears down here that turn to make the pivot point for the pendulum go up and down. The one gear in the bottom was actually split, and that's unusual as far as I was concerned. And what I found out, the slider up here that moves up and down, when you adjust that, there's a little spring washer with a shouldered screw here, and you're supposed to, when you tighten this, it's supposed to put some pressure on the spring washer just to put a little tension on this slide so it can move up and down and change the effective length of the pendulum. And what happened, it was binding, so whenever somebody tried to adjust the speed, you really had to bear down on the adjustment, and it split the little gear. So what I did is I took the gear and I compressed it back to where it needed to be, and I soldered it. And I took a little brass, very thin brass washer, and soldered that on the face of the gear, and that added reinforcement. And then what I did, I took this piece here and I carefully filed it down. I took off about 8 or 9 thousandths worth of material. Now it has a good, comfortable movement to it. It's the little spring washer puts enough pressure on it where it holds it when you set it, but it's not so tight that it doesn't move easily. So that was pretty good. The other thing I did on the from the Sonora chime part of the mechanism, this little arm was broken off, so I took this apart. I fabricated a new arm and staked it back onto the piece here. Now that's as good as it needs to be, and it'll work good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean out the Sonora mechanism, make sure that's all good, and I'm going to have to make a new chime rod to get the Westminster chimes running good, but it's coming along. The other thing I'm going to do is with the case, I'm going to try to not refinish, but I'm going to try and work with the original finish. It's a shellac type finish. I'm going to use some alcohol and a technique to try and re-amalgamate the finish, and I'm going to use a French polishing technique that I've done in the past. It works very well. It's a lot of work, but the results are pretty good. And I brought another Seth Thomas timbre type clock from looked like garbage to it looks really good. I mean, it looks aged, but nicely aged. So I'm going to see how this works out, because I really don't want to refinish the case if I don't have to. So I'll be doing more in a video as far as that goes. Now, this is the case for the Seth Thomas Sonora clock I've been working on, and if you can see the finish, it's cracked or alligatored, whatever you want to call it, and it looks pretty bad. And there's a little bit of veneering damage up on the face there, but all in all, it's not the worst condition. There's some really good alligatoring there. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with this door here. And what I've got is nothing more than a rag with, I'm going to start with denatured alcohol. And I'm not going to do this all on camera, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start rubbing this door with this alcohol solution to try and amalgamate the finish, or even slightly remove it. Once I have that, it's a shellac, I believe, on these clocks, so once I have that kind of worked in there and the finish is dissolved, it kind of goes back, flows back out. And then what I'm going to do is a technique that's French polish, and you make a little they call it a tampon, but it's like a linen rag with a inside is like a cotton batting that you soak with the shellac, and I'm going to use an amber shellac. And what you do is you start a rubbing motion with this, and what it does is it starts applying shellac, and you use a little bit of olive oil, believe it or not, and that keeps the tampon flowing smoothly. And it's amazing what happens with just a little bit of elbow work. So I'm gonna work on this a bit and see if I can bring this finish back a bit, because I really don't want to redo the clock unless I absolutely have to. And I've done one of these before, and quite honestly, the finish was probably worse than this one. And it just was amazing how it came back. So I'll work on this at least back door for a little bit, and I'll post back. Okay, I've made a little more progress on this Seth Thomas Sonora clock project, and what you're looking at here, there was a section of the veneer that had up here, it had blistered or chipped, and I was going to leave it, but it looked horrible. So what I did is I carefully removed the veneer in the offending area, and have replaced it with another piece of mahogany veneer. And at this point also I've cleaned the entire case, and it's actually looking pretty good. What I want to do eventually is I'm going to give this a French polish, and right now the case is dull looking, but there's a good amount of the original finish still left on it. It just needs to be worked on a bit. So once I stain the patch I've got there, and it dries for a while, probably I'll let it dry for a week. And what I'm going to do then is I've got some amber shellac, and I'm going to do a French polish in this whole case, and it's going to look like $1,000,000 when it's done. What I have here, I have the rear door that I'm actually going to start on now, and I've cleaned it and scuffed it so it's smooth with a Scotch-Brite, and I'm going to perform a French polish on that. Okay, what I've got to do this French polishing with now is I got a lint-free linen cloth. I've got a hunk of cotton batting. Got some amber shellac in this little bottle here because it's nice to apply to the inner batting of this thing to keep the tampon moist. And if you're giggling about the tampon, it's time to grow up. what I have here too is this is a little syringe, and it's olive oil. And what you do with the olive oil is you put a few drops of the olive oil on the bottom of your tampon when you're going to rub out your thing, and it keeps the tampon moving nice and easily along the surface you're trying to do the French polish to. And you can't do it without it. And the shellac cures in such a way that the olive oil does not react with the finish, and the way it dries, the olive oil doesn't become part of the finish. Either it rises to the surface, and it works real good. And when you're doing the French polish, as you're wiping the pad across your piece, when it's working correctly, it looks almost like you've got a windshield wiper and it's wiping across your window, and it leaves that very faint haze that disappears. And when it's working like that, you know that your tampon's correctly loaded and gliding across your surface. And when it's not, it'll stick, and it's all kind of problems. So what you do is you take some of this, take some of the amber shellac, and you load up your inner core like that. And what you do then, it's hard to do this with filming, but you take your piece here, and you bring the corners together, and you form a ball like that. And what you do then is you start this kind of motion across your piece. And what that does is it starts applying your shellac to the surface. And because this is a shellac surface, it'll actually re-amalgamate with the surface, and it works great. And although I'm not going to sit here and try and film myself doing it, I'll do a little piece after I'm done doing this back side of the door, and you can take a look to see how it worked.